I am Devon Marie Kennerson, and I am a recovering drug addict. I started in high school, experimenting with pot and alcohol, and then my addiction progressed the further into my 20s. My mother was a drug addict who died when I was 11. My father was in and out of our lives, who also struggles with alcohol addiction.
What would determine whether someone would have an addictive disorder is your genetics. But the other piece of it that plays into whether or not you develop an addictive disorder is in the first 3 years of life. And if the child is not given enough good stimulation during those first 3 years of life, they have the potential, especially coupled with genetic loading, to develop an addictive brain.
It's opened me up to a different world. It kind of gives me an understanding of where my mom was at and how hard it was for her versus anybody else that struggles with addiction.
There is no way out. When they take their first drink or their first drug, it's going to have a phenomenal effect, an intense pleasure for them. And they won't know that, oh my God, my brain is doing that because I have the propensity towards an addictive brain. All they'll know is, boy, this feels good. I think I'll do more.
Heroin started, I tried it once when I was 19, and then I never touched it again. And then within the last year, I was reintroduced to it and started using it quite frequently. I was addicted to pain pills, and I couldn't afford them anymore, and it was hard to find them, and I just didn't know how to handle with what was going on in my everyday life. So I was just trying to numb myself.
Most people who start out using opiates are most often starting out with prescribed opiates, painkillers essentially. And they may graduate to using heroin because it's cheaper and easier to get to.
Live in isolation with this and don't know that there are other people in recovery out there who have been down that road and know exactly where she's been.
We have a lot of social stigma around people with active addiction and in recovery from addiction because often we focus on sort of the sensational or dysfunctional side of active addiction, which certainly is part of the story, but often people don't get the other side of the story, that people do get better and do get healthy and do become productive members of society.
The stigma that you're seeing in society, I think, is twofold. The first of which is that if your life has been touched by addiction in some way, there's many times a very negative feeling about addiction. You know, it could have been a parent, an uncle, a sibling, you have a broken heart around it. So you already have developed a negative attitude about addiction. But we also, in our society, look at how we sensationalize it.
The biggest misconception about substance addiction, I would have to say, is probably the idea that it's simply mind over matter. That if the addict just decided, I'm going to quit, that's all it would take. This is a true illness like any other illness.
Addiction is strong, and it's lifelong, and once they start, it's very hard to stop.
We're seeing more and more young people addicted today is because there are more and more people in our society with untreated addictive disorder. Only about 10% of people with this chronic lethal disease get treatment. We as Americans have done a very, very poor job ignoring, isolating, and not embracing this disorder. And as a result, our society is getting sicker and sicker with the disorder.
The 23 million Americans living in long-term recovery are an important group of people because we often see only active addiction. And here's 23 million people who found answers to the addiction epidemic. And they're the ones with a lot of solutions, and they found how to support people in recovery. And we need to start asking them about how they got there and how they got well and how they stay well.
I want to make a difference. I want to live and to see my future, and I want to see a change happen in our community.